Welcome to Get Serious. So I wanted to do a quick interjection of some really interesting deal update before I get back to the Hormozy Live event notes, just because I think this one is super exciting, very relevant. Love to get this stuff top of mind for you all. So uh, again, our investment thesis has really continue, in the land industry, like you're always looking for motivated sellers, right? But I think even more so just seeing the incoming distress and growing distress within the economy. I mean, you can see all the, issues going on the macro side, jobs related to like, pretty much everything macro wise is like not that encouraging from an economic health perspective. I know people point to the stock market, but like it's really kind of just a bet on AI. And even from the stock market, like it's really just the top 10% of uh you know folks within the wealth bracket in the US that have exposure. Again, 90% of the stock market is owned by the top 10%. 50% of it is owned by the top 1%. So it's so top heavy. For such a loud number. We just have to be aware of that. Whereas like there's just so much other shakiness across much of the remainder of the market. Actually, I mean, this is another discussion, but I think like inflation numbers are probably less likely to be continuing to creep up, since we see rents, kind of tamped down and decreasing on average across much of the country too. So that's a whole nother discussion thing with oil prices. Nevertheless, all of this is just like, some general shakiness that I think is impacting a ton of people. Like, look at these, anticipated healthcare premiums expected to go up. Like, I mean, my wife and I and our kid, like we utilize healthcare marketplace exchange, as entrepreneurs. The Obamacare setup, and yeah, it's like super expensive monthly plans for like crazy high deductible, like not great health insurance. And now it's going to be even more expensive, and like we're in a fortunate position where we can like eat those costs. It still hurts more than I would like it to, but how many other folks are struggling with expenses like that? And so there was again, I'm getting sidetracked here, but like the thesis is just like, okay, we're sitting on liquidity to await distress to happen, and like it's just started to come a bit more often here. Like it's paying off as far as our strategy to be able to act really quickly when that distress comes up. So we got this commercial property, which again, first I'm like, commercial is usually not as encouraging to go after, and it was in North Carolina, kind of near the Research Triangle, like really hot area, one of the most resilient areas of the country when it comes just to the residential market in particular, and commercial tends to follow resi. And there was like a lot of precedent for routine commercial sales in the area here. Like a lot, 99% of the time people send me commercial deals. That is not the case. Like it might be just, first a commercial lot like in a resi area, or you really can't find like any recent sale. Their stuff has just been sitting on the market forever with no real activity, and like the sellers are just looking for unrealistic prices. So like our risk threshold for going after commercial properties, like it's just higher compared to resi on average. So, usually the buy prices are higher, lower buyer pool, like longer time on market. It's just, on average going to be riskier. And so this property was supposed to be for $450K buy. Seemed to have precedent for selling between like 700-ish to maybe $1 million at the top end, but could be like a really long hold time. Like you could, you have to go through just a super slow city where there's no real entitlement risk, but if you wanted to work with a buyer who you might be able to get under contract within a couple months, like it could take close to 2 years to fully exit out of the property, but you could sell for around like $1 million, potentially a bit less. And so like at that 450K number, Especially at that timeline, it really didn't make sense to pursue. And especially again, like we're going to be more conservative. I'd be thinking, okay, there's like really solid precedent for to sell this for at least 700,000 based on the comps in the area. Maybe like worst case 600. So like if you're buying at 450, there's just really not great margin there, but to work with, especially for a longer time. So usually when we look at a deal for funding, some funders just throw out, hey, this is just not for us. And sometimes will do like it's either not at our minimum price threshold, or it's like there's just not any solid comps on this market that we can really think that any price is going to work, or like just too inferior. The characteristics, again, if we're in like the bottom quarter of characteristics, I won't even consider purchasing the property in this market nationally. So in this case, like, yeah, solid asset here, but the pricing is just off here. And we knew, like, and it was a tight turnaround time. We had like 2 week when this land investor reached out to us, it was like 2 week close, 450K. Like we've done that before, but it's not great here. And we knew the seller was distressed. Like he had bills to pay primarily for medical expenses, and had bought this property for 400K just over 10 years ago. And so it's like, yeah, basically at that break even price, especially net of opportunity costs, inflation and all that. So, but again, looking at that hold time, I was like, yeah, it does not make sense at that price, but I'm just going to throw it out there. Like you get this guy down to 250K. This becomes like really interesting here because that accounts for that type of risk. We usually prefer to dispo assets in sub 12 months. But to me, like timing, it just needs to be priced properly. I feel like I podcasted a bit on this more recently. Sometimes a lot of stuff going on, but now it's just like more concrete details here. So worth repeating in more detailed fashion. And so it's like, at that number, yeah, 450K doesn't make sense, but 250, yeah, could make sense, especially if we needed to hold it for potentially longer here, where it's like it's throwing out a price where there's like effectively no chance to lose money, like literally zero. Just looking at the inherent market there, and could be worth like the opportunity cost to hold on to an asset for that long. And when we understand there's like pretty consistent demand in that area, and could be worth us taking a swing on something like that. So usually like when I toss out those numbers, like very rare, like, I mean, again, most of the time the seller's like, yeah, no chance. Or the land investor told me, yeah, this is already like the bottom dollar. And I go, well, here's a number. If you ever get back to them, like this would be a lot more interesting at this. Again, most of the time it's not going to work out. And when I tossed that 250K number out, and this was over this last weekend, checking into my email, and the land investor was like, hey, this guy is actually, he's going to take the deal. But he's like, yeah, only if we can close this coming week. So it was like a sub-week process to decide on, committing $250,000 cash. But the guy was willing to take 3K off of his sales price. He was like, eat a big loss too from his 2014 purchase. But again, medical expenses, but $250,000 cash. Not a lot of people can close that quickly. And like, again, credit to the land investor for handling the negotiation well. It's just, honesty is really like the best policy. When you come to the negotiation table generally, and the land investor's like, hey, I refer you out to the broker working with, like, yeah, you might be able to get $1 million for this property, but it's going to take 2 years. Whereas, yeah, like our hands are tied as far as the money we can bring to the table here. Like, I know you want 450, but like with this, we're going to have to sit on this for a while. Like 250, that's all we can do. And this guy took it. And so we really had to scramble. So like, okay, but to me, this is just like exciting. Like I can work, early on a Sunday morning. Like I prefer, it's a whole nother discussion, but like I prefer Slack in the system to like be able to jump on these opportunities right away, because this is what we look out for. Like there's potentially like 3 to 4x, profit margin in this, even if it takes a bit longer to hold. Broker, very, very solid, has done a lot of business in the area, like tens of millions of dollars worth. Was responsive like on a Sunday morning. Like this is stuff I want to see the land investor working with us, very experienced as well too. So like all of those are, especially if you have to move quickly, positive for getting something over the table. and going over the various DD with the brokers, like really, ideally you could have gotten a bit more DD on like some engineering studies and just seeing, how much, I don't know, rock is in the soil and so forth, just to see how easy it might be to develop. Because like even if it comes back like worst case scenario, like you're buying it at a price that is just an absolute no brainer. And so like we've seen a few of these deals this year where it's like in this market, we've been doing land for almost 6 years now, and like some of the best deals we've ever seen have come in this year that have just like, man, this is just a screamer. So this is why, like, again, tougher economy to work in. There's no doubt it's just tougher to run a business, but those opportunities, if you are set up for them, are definitely out there to be able to jump on. And, this broker was mentioning too, because I was already under the impression, this could take like well over a year to sell. But he's like, at this price that you're getting, you can also attract buyers who would be willing to purchase the property at a discount, which could still be like 500 to 600K, like still a double, with the understanding that, then they would go through the entitlement process on their own or potentially look to sell it to another buyer and fully entitle it out. So it's almost like, we're flipping to, if you get ever a position where you can like flip to a flipper, that's just a really strong position to be in because we have the optionality. It's like, okay, yeah, we could, depending on how the market pans out and the buyer pool shows up, somebody presents like an excellent offer, we could consider waiting that potentially full 2 years, or, generally I'm more about velocity of capital. So it's like, yeah, we could potentially exit this thing for, at least a 2x sub 6 months, ideally. And it seemed likely based on, that type of price point. Plus there's an interesting auction pathway to do too, but a reserve auction, fortunately, not a absolute, like I've talked about before and experienced some of the most stressful time in my life. So you could set it up, and where, this broker has a lot of experience doing a reserve auction in the area, things that would perform like equivalently, somewhere between like the 500 to 700K range. Approximately as well, still would come down to the last minute, but at least you have reserve to work with. And so that to me would be like the more interesting pathway compared to waiting the whole time. So just like, again, I prefer velocity of capital generally, keeping my internal rate of return numbers up and optionality, and like who's going to complain about a 2x. So that is what we're planning to do here. We completed our due diligence, got the site visit in, like everything is squared away here. Anticipate like by the time you hear this, we'll have closed on the property. So pumped about this one. Wanted to interject before more notes from Hormozy here. Again, deals can be found here, and maybe like the best deal that we've ever seen. Like it just, sometimes we keep surprising ourselves by the quality of deals that are coming our way. This, if you properly set up your business to work through distress, and not even necessarily like messy title distress. I think that's like great. You can do that, but just general economic distress, being ready to move, have liquidity to jump on opportunities, and like be ready to strike. Yeah, I can drop everything on a Sunday to like get this stuff over the finish line. That's what it takes to win in this market. Exciting stuff. More to come. SeriousLand.capital for any funding needs. 50K minimum buy price. Hope to do more of these ASAP, so send them our way. Land Daily Diligence Facebook group. A lot of other stuff going on. More to come here. Subscribe and share, everybody. Take care now. Bye.